Yalimad everyone, I'm Asad Abdullah, and I want to start by thanking everyone for joining. Tonight's program, Young Ismailis in Politics, is a joint collaborative program between the Ismaili Professionals Network and the Ismaili Students Network, and is a part of the National Council for United States Voter Registration and Civic Engagement Campaign. The Ismaili Professionals Network is focused on connecting us with each other, assisting with career and professional development, providing resources for skills development, highlighting unique career tracks, and sharing thought leadership like this session today with the community. Furthermore, IPN offers a number of programs and services, such as job search support services, connecting you with other Ismaili professionals within your target companies and industries, certification programs, and virtual platforms to connect the community. Please reach out to IPN at any time by emailing us at connect@ipnonline.net for any questions or assistance. ISN is a student-led organization connecting over 3,000 Ismaili Muslim undergraduate and graduate students at over 400 college campuses around the country, supported by a team of campus reps. The network brings together students and alums through community building and social events, career planning, discussions about our faith, inter-college athletics, service opportunities, networking, and much more to support students throughout their higher education career. With that, I'd like to introduce the moderator for tonight's panel, Natasha. Natasha Ladani works at the New York Civic Engagement Table as a data and field associate, where she collaborates with numerous partner organizations to build out their civic engagement work in their local communities. Using data-driven tools and an approach centered on organizing, Natasha hopes to empower her partners in their strategies and goals. She has previously worked with other community organizations in areas such as housing, education, and media. Natasha was raised in both Pennsylvania and Massachusetts, but resides in New York City.
Thank you, Asad, and thanks to everyone who has joined us. In tonight's panel, we will talk to three dynamic young Ismailis who are working in politics. Hopefully, their stories, journeys, and experiences will inspire the college students and young professionals watching tonight to become civically engaged and active in their own communities and take part in this year's elections in their own way. Our three panelists tonight are Samir Asani, Arisa Somani, and Karim Farishta. Samira Asani worked as the communications director for Congresswoman Eddie Bernice Johnson, chairwoman of the House Science, Space, and Technology Committee in the U.S. House of Representatives. He was responsible for handling the media relations and strategic planning for her office. Samir has also spent time with the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, the Office of Representative Philemon Vela, and the Texas House of Representatives. Samir is currently pursuing a Juris Doctorate at Texas A&M University School of Law. Arisa Somani is a community organizer and changemaker living in Washington, D.C. She serves as the Deputy Director of Organizing and Training at When We All Vote, Michelle Obama's nonpartisan, nonprofit voting initiative that is on a mission to close the race and age gap in voting. In her role, she harnesses grassroots energy by training a national base of 27,000 volunteers on how to register and mobilize their communities to vote. She has facilitated national training calls with notable guest speakers, including former First Lady Michelle Obama, the Duchess of Sussex Meghan Markle, Tom Hanks, Lin-Manuel Miranda, and others. Arisa grew up in Seattle, Washington as a child of Ismaili immigrants from Kenya and Tanzania. She is passionate about ensuring that underrepresented groups have power in their political process. Karim Farishta is the Deputy Coalitions Director and Texas Asian American Outreach Director for the Biden for President campaign. Karim joins the Biden team to lead statewide AAPI coalition building after having served as campaign manager for Shri Kulkarni's congressional bid in 2018 and executing a 15-language minority voter outreach program. A native of Sugarland, Karim's family hails from Bangladesh, Burma, India, and Pakistan. Prior to returning home to Texas, he served as a presidential appointee in the Obama White House and graduated from the Harvard Kennedy School of Government. Our panelists tonight will share with us their insights, their work, and how they came to be involved, and how all of us can be engaged too. A note for our viewers, each panelist tonight is speaking solely on behalf of themselves. Their views they share tonight don't reflect the views of their current or former employers or the organizations they're affiliated with. With that, I'm excited to begin tonight's panel and kick us off with our first question for all the panelists, and anyone can go first. Why did you decide to get into politics, and how did you start getting involved?
I can take this one first, guys. So Yalimba, thank you so much for having me, and Kareem Marisa, so glad to be with you. Natasha, you as well. So for me, it started when I was in the first grade back in 2000, and I got asked by my local city paper what my thoughts were on that election. And safe to say, I had a few ideas, some good, some not so good, but that's what you expect from a 6-year-old. So for me, it really peaked when I got into high school and college, and it just really built from there. It started off with me interning with a judge, with a member of Congress, moving to Austin and being at the state capitol there, and then moving to DC after I graduated during the last presidential cycle. And that was a really, really special place to be. But what gravitated me towards politics and my role in communications was the idea that the words and the messages that we have can inspire us to try and bring about the change that we seek. So a lot of folks do a lot of important work in policy, and that's great. I wish I was as smart as those folks. But for me, the reason why I was so passionate about communications was I was inspired by folks that have shared thoughts on what we can do better in our country, and I wanted to follow suit. But the other part that I was really excited about was the types of communications and messages that we can have within our own circles, and how we can talk to our friends and our family about the importance of being involved there. So I'm really excited to do that with the folks here tonight.
Thanks, Samir. Arisa, I'd like to hear from you.
Yeah, so I got involved in politics because I grew up with a very interesting story, and I didn't necessarily see that story represented anywhere. So I grew up as a child of Ismaili immigrants from Kenya and Tanzania, and I am also a triplet. And there's so many different parts of my story that I think are a little strange and a little interesting. And I kind of looked outward as a child to try and figure out if there were other people in power, other public figures who kind of had similar parts of that story. And I didn't see that represented in the public sphere. And so growing up, I wanted to change that. I also didn't see a lot of women in politics. I didn't see a lot of women of color in politics. I didn't see a lot of South Asian women in politics. And so that's something that I set out to change, and that is what my political career has been about.
Thank you so much for sharing. Kareem?
So first off, thank you so much for having me. And it's such a delight to be on this panel with Samir and Arisa, two people who I deeply admire. My start in politics starts with this mantra that I listened to a lot in high school, this idea that from awareness comes action. And I always thought it was important for us as a community, whether we be Muslim Americans, Asian Americans, folks of color, to realize that we need to be aware about the politics of the countries and the communities that we live in. And from that awareness, turn that into action. I come from a family that has been disjointed because of war. My dada, my grandfather, is from Burma. My dadi, my grandmother, is from Bangladesh. My dad is from India, and my mom is from Pakistan. It's a truly American story that brings me into the sphere of politics, because I grew up in a very, very small town in Bay City, Texas. And then we moved into Sugar Land and spent most of my time in Houston. And I realized that diversity is truly our strength if folks who represent us in office are in fact people like us and people that we can look up to and admire. I was grateful to have my start in politics through working with refugee communities, many of those communities that my family belonged to when they moved here to the United States. And then I got the chance to work with a variety of different nonprofit organizations and realized that in order to seek and actualize power and our strength, we have to understand how government functions. And I was grateful to then work for President Barack Obama and Vice President Biden at the White House, where I realized that public engagement and civic engagement is so critical to us realizing what it means to be citizens of this country and to do our part every single day to uplift our own communities and to live out the American dream. So my decision to be in politics is because representation matters. It's because our stories matter. And at the end of the day, those who represent us should be held to account. And we should aspire to see the best version of our own country. And every single day, I wake up and I think about what country can we build together and how is the Ismaili community going to be part and parcel of crafting and navigating a new story of America that we haven't quite seen yet, a story of America that's going to change our country for generations to come. So politics, quite literally, is about us and what we believe in and the values that we hold dear. And that's why I have believed in my heart and in my core that our engagement is about us moving forward and us propelling our country in a direction that represents the best of us every single day.
Thank you so much. It sounds like for all of you, at least a little bit, your identity played a role in this path that you chose. So I'd love to ask, and I'll start with Kareem just because you mentioned this very explicitly about the faith. So I'd love to know, in what ways have the ethics of our faith guided you in your work in politics?
Absolutely. I take a lot of direction from our Jamaat and from the activities that we do in Jamaat Kana and the values that we talk about, whether they be about pluralism, whether they be about the ethics of compassion, of resilience, or of strength. But the one that really sticks out to me and one that I keep going back to is knowing that in our community, the ethic of faith, that the right to have hope is what gives us the most motivation to do the most change. I believe that ethics around hope and optimism are what really guide me every single day. There is a vision of America that can be, and there's a vision of America that could and should be. And I often hark on the ethic of hope to think about the America that we could and should be building. So when I see programming going on at Jamaat Kana, or when I hear about what our community is doing, whether it's responding to the victims of Hurricane Harvey, or whether it's standing up and providing food shelter and water after a natural disaster, or whether it's encouraging people to learn about what it means to be a part of the Knowledge Society. I think the ethic of hope is what guides me every single day, because I, in my heart of hearts, do believe that hope is the single most important unifier that we all have to envision a country and a world that we haven't quite seen yet. And that is so emblematic of the Ismaili faith tradition, and it is so emblematic of my parents' own journey into the United States.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Arisa or Samir, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I really love that idea that Kareem just mentioned about the world as it is and thinking about the world as it should be. And I would say that that's what propelled me into this work as well, that I grew up listening to incredible Furmans from Maulana Hazrat Imam and hearing the word pluralism over and over and thinking about the world as it should be. And then growing up in a post 9/11 society, in a society that was not quite accepting and a little hostile towards South Asians, towards people of color, towards Muslim Americans. And that contrast of really wanting to actualize the world as it should be compared to the world that we were living in is part of the ethic of faith that guided me into this work.
Absolutely. And Samir, anything else?
Yeah, so I mean, Kareem and Arisa, you guys both touched on, some of the things that Hazramam has said directly to us, right? So my favorite quote of Maulana Hazram's is, "We cannot make the world safe for democracy unless we also make it safe for diversity." And so, I mean, we've heard so often Hazram talk about the inherently diverse community that we are globally, but also the diversity that's in our Jamaat just in the United States, right? Like Kareem, my family hails from places like India and Pakistan, but we've also got members of Jamaat from East Africa, from Central Asia, from the Middle East, from the former USSR. And on top of that, we've got folks in our community that are white and that are Black as well. So we are absolutely a diverse community. But the second part of that quote from Hazramam is the idea that we also need to be active participants in our democracy. That's a crucial second step that I'm really excited to see that we're talking about right now. So I really think that all of us, yes, indeed, thinking about what the change that we can create together in the world that we'll be able to create together is absolutely a driving force. But I think, like Kareem and Arisa just said, it really comes from our faith. At least for me, it does. The idea that we have a responsibility to each other. And part of the way that we fulfill that obligation is by being civically engaged, which is why I'm so excited to see everything that we've been doing so far.
Yeah, I'm also very excited to be seeing all of these programs that are coming out. And thank you all for sharing your journeys and how your thought process right now is happening. Looking a little bit forward, I'd love to hear how you see your role in politics evolving in the future. Anyone can start.
So I am really excited about how often the folks that we think are the types of people that should be in elected office, how the definition of that is changing all the time. And we can look to members of our own Jamaat, not just the folks that we see on TV all the time and in our social media feeds. We see, you don't need to be a successful business owner or a big CEO to be involved in the decisions that affect everyone's lives. Rather, you have to be somebody from a community. I think you need to identify with issues that arise and have ideas on how to solve them. And again, we can look to members of our own Jamaat as examples of this, right? I know we've got more than a few elected officials at city and local levels in Texas that we're really proud of. And then also, I'm thinking of someone like Safia Wazir, a representative in New Hampshire who is a refugee from Afghanistan. And she ran in 2018 for a state assembly seat. So I see folks like her as an example of people that are doing more than just the bare minimum, that are actively seeking to be instruments for change and for good. And I'm so happy that and I'm really hopeful that people like Safia and others can inspire younger folks to do so. And I was a counselor at Aluma last summer, and even one of my participants who's in high school ran for his student board. And so seeing folks like that it inspires me to believe that we are going to do big things together, and the Ismaili community is going to be a big part of it.
Yes, I agree. I'm very excited to see our community advancing. Arisa, would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I think that for me, I want to go back to that theme about hope, which I think is the core of this work. And for all of us who have had the privilege to be involved in public service, we have seen this work's ability to engage and inspire. And we've also seen the way that this news cycle can beat you down and can make you feel hopeless and jaded and cynical. And so I think that in thinking about the future of this work and in thinking about also what I want to focus on, my greatest interest is informing people about the power that they already have that they don't necessarily know about. There's a lot of people in this world who really want to get involved in politics, who really want to make their communities better, and who don't know how to start, or folks who look around and think that they can't make a difference because they're just one person. So I think that this area of civic engagement and letting people know that they have power in their political process, they have power in the direction of this country, the direction of this world, that is the most important and precious thing to me. And I think that's something that everyone on this panel can also relate to.
Absolutely. And lastly, Kareem.
Well, I would love to pick up right where Arisa left off on building power, because I do believe that a politics that is representative is one that gives power to those who haven't had power in the past. And something I often think about is a quote from Ayanna Pressley, and she says, "Those who have been the most proximate to the pain need to be the most proximate to the power." And I realize that our communities have been quite proximate to the pains of a society that has marginalized them and at times has brought them down. I believe in a politics and a society that is values driven. When we look to November, I think about what's really on the ballot: decency and democracy, safety and saving lives. Because as we want to think about a politics of the future, we really do have to take stock of a politics of the present. And a politics of the present has completely upended our lives. We have prevented children from going to schools. We have shut down small businesses, and we aren't able to see our family members and our friends anymore. Because unfortunately, there have been moments when science and values of togetherness, of community, haven't been valued in the way that they should be every single day in America. So an America that I envision and an America that I do see is one where there is less suffering, where fewer folks are dying because of a pandemic, because of political choices that they didn't make and politicians made for them, and that we continue to value the inherent dignity and the inherent worth of every single individual, where we have comprehensive plans and clear action points to make sure that everyone has a fair shot in our country, where there is steady and stable leadership, and where we can look up to leaders and make sure that our kids and our grandchildren see themselves in them. And that's the country that I want to build, a country that is more hopeful, a country that embodies the best of us, where we begin to see ourselves as the majority makers, as those who will be the change makers, the champions of civic engagement that our community so earnestly needs.
Thank you so much for sharing. It sounds like there's this clearer and clearer vision of the future that you're all painting. Are there any other thoughts in this idea of your role in politics in the future, or the future of politics in this country?
Yeah, I'd love to pick right back up with where Kareem left off, right? I think you nailed it on the head, my friend. You know, there's this saying that always stuck out to me, and that's the power of the people is always greater than the people in power. And so exactly along the lines of what Risa said, the ability to change the direction of the future is already in our hands. It's now our job to go exercise it. And so along the lines of building a more hopeful country, a country that values folks like us, a country that is more attuned to the issues of our communities, and that one is shaped by people like us, because we're the ones that have seats at the table, is so important. And so I think that's why folks all across our all across the country are realizing that this is one of those elections that can have consequences for 5, 6, maybe 10 generations to come. And so that's one of the reasons why I'm hopeful, is that we as a Jamaat are coming together to express our voice. And the way that we do that in this process now is by voting.
Thank you so much. And what was amazing was that all of your responses in the future kind of hinted to the next generation as well. So I'd love to hear what advice you would give to other Ismailis who are aspiring to be in politics. And Arisa, I'd love to start with you.
Yeah, that is a great question. And it's one that I think about all the time, because you know, it feels like not too long ago, I was a little girl who was passionate about this work and who didn't know if I could make it in politics or in public service. So my advice would be to go for it. You do not need to see the whole staircase to take a step in this work. And I think that I would be remiss if I didn't mention that there is a lot of pressure in our community to pursue some traditional fields in health, medicine, science, business, and that's a pressure that I myself struggled with. and that I myself thought about a lot when I was thinking about whether or not this was the work that was right for me. And I had to realize and reckon with the fact that this is my life to live, and that sometimes you have to pave your own path. And once you do, and you believe in what you're doing, the rest will follow. The support will come. The success will come. It's so important to find people in your life who are supportive of what you're doing, who believe in you. And it's so important to realize that when you are true to yourself, when you pursue what you are most passionate about, when you are shining in something that can truly make a difference in the world, you are also giving other people permission to do the same.
Thank you so much. I really love that staircase metaphor. It's a beautiful image. Samir or Kareem, any other thoughts on this question?
I can go next. Amen to everything that Arisa just said. Absolutely 100% agree. In terms of those who are aspiring to be in public service and in politics, my recommendation and my advice would be don't be too hard on yourself. I say this as someone who has been very hard on myself in realizing and recognizing that success is often something that zigzags and it doesn't come immediately. Oftentimes this work is quite grueling and it's personal, because the reason we do it is because we see ourselves in the future that we want to build. Lean on those, many of us who are on this call and those who are older than us, and ask folks for advice. I think more often than not, more people will be willing to share their life experience with you and be willing to share the amount of times that they've fallen down. And I'll be the first to say, from a personal note, that there have been so many instances in which I haven't succeeded in public service, and when I have been brought down, and where my values have been tested. And I often go back to the values that lift me up every day to say, okay, why am I in this work? And it's because of that generational imperative, that idea that the country that we hope to build is difficult to build because we haven't quite seen it yet. And in order for us to be successful in this endeavor of public service in politics is to begin to see ourselves and our lived realities and what we have grown up with as part and parcel to the country that we want to build. So it's completely okay to not be successful the first time around, or even the second or the third, but realizing that what you're doing is part of a longer trajectory that you're telling yourselves and you're telling our community and those around us that our voices matter and that our perspectives matter. And at the end of the day, the country that we hope to see is going to be built by those who sacrifice their time, knowledge, and their resources every single day to see a vision of the country that takes a lot of work. So be prepared to be persistent and be prepared to realize that the journey isn't going to be one that is going to go straight from point A to point B, but one that will require us to take a few steps forward. And sometimes we will have to take a few steps back. But at the end of the day, it's incumbent on all of us to lift each other up and to realize that together we can do so much more when we see our collective strength as a community.
Yes, I 100% agree with you, Kareem. Now, Samir, I'd also love to hear the advice you would give to aspiring Ismailis in politics.
Yeah, definitely. And I think Kareem nailed it, right? Part of what is challenging but so rewarding about a life in public service is the idea that it's never going to be easy. Oftentimes getting involved, getting your foot in the door is the hardest part, but then the challenge also comes in helping the people that are turning to you for the solutions to the problems in their lives, right? And that's the rewarding part as well. I think that this younger generation is perhaps the most passionate, energized, invested group of young adults I've ever met in my life. And it's so good to see how many of them care about social justice causes and a lot of other things that get decided in the arena of public policy. So for those of you folks that have that kind of passion, that have that kind of drive and desire, absolutely go for it. absolutely pursue it. And there are plenty of folks within our community that you don't always hear about, but that have been involved in both the top level of politics, but also on the ground with their sleeves rolled up doing the hard work. And so part of my advice would be, absolutely reach out to all of us. We are happy to help, whether we agree with you on whether we share your views on politics or not. That's never been a barrier to us offering a helping hand to somebody who we see as passionate about public service. And then the other thing is don't just look national, but you can also look to your own community. And oftentimes that's a great way to get started. And sometimes it's a little frustrating to go up the ladder one rung at a time if you do envision yourself in Washington or in your state capital. But oftentimes just getting your first start is a way that you can lead you to a future job. Like when I was 17 and I was a senior in high school, I interned for a member of Congress in Dallas. Her name was Eddie Bernice Johnson, and that's who I ended up being communications director for like 5 or 6 years later. So you never know what opportunities can start if you just try and pick up the phone and call that local state rep or that city council member to see if you have an opportunity with them to start off.
Yeah, and I also think that just to go back to that place where we're talking about how we just need to take that first step. And sometimes it's hard when there's pressure in our community to pursue certain types of work and certain types of education. I want to say that I mentioned that I experienced this as well, and I'm going to go a step further and share my story. Because I'm a triplet, my siblings and I kind of dealt with this pressure in different ways. And I would say that my siblings both pursued more traditional careers. We all thought that we would specialize in science, in medicine, in business. And it became very clear early on that 2 of us were going to do that, and 1 of us was going to do something very different. And I remember really questioning whether or not I could make it in this work. I remember trying to figure out if I had what it took to go into politics, especially when I hadn't seen any women or South Asian women or Ismaili women in my Seattle Jamaat going into this work. And there was one day where I called my mom in the middle of a school day. I was at Seattle University. And I told her, you know what? I think this politics thing isn't for me. I think that I have to give it up. I think that you were right. You know what? I'm going to go to nursing school. And she replied, I thought that's not what you're passionate about. You shouldn't do something that you don't care about. And that really struck a chord with me and I think that reiterates that point that when you allow yourself to believe in yourself and to do the things that make you shine and that you're passionate about, other people around you pick up on that. And other people around you will be rooting for you, even if you don't know it. So I think it's so important, like Samir said, like Kareem said, to take the first step, to contact a member of the community that may be involved in this work, to volunteer locally, to get involved with a campaign, to make sure that you are doing what you need to do to learn about this work, and the rest will follow.
Thank you so much for sharing that story, and really to all of you for sharing such personal stories about where you are and how you got there. As a young Ismaili in politics, I really appreciate the advice, so thank you personally for that. And I'm just thinking outside of a professional stance, because we're all professionally involved in politics, how can others who aren't necessarily professionally involved in politics get civically engaged and involved as well?
I can go first. I think there's always a place for us to be involved in the political sphere, right? Whether it's attending a school board meeting or whether it's showing up to a virtual Zoom event. Even your participation today in this event is emblematic of your interest in a country that we wish to build together. Sometimes it's writing postcards. Sometimes it's calling a member of Congress or even writing a letter to the President of the United States. There was a time when I kid you not, our family had gone to London for a family trip. And I was so inspired by Mayor Sadiq Khan that I stood in the gift shop downstairs and asked for a sheet of paper and wrote a letter to Mayor Khan in London, even though I'm not a UK resident. But I was so inspired to see a Muslim American or Muslim Londoner rise to a position of such privilege and power, and to do so with such poise and earnestness. So sometimes getting involved is about you reaching out to your own family. Like earlier this week, I talked to my 17-year-old cousin and I asked him, how do you feel about what's going on in the country this week? And he said, you know, I'm a bit disoriented. It's difficult to not be frustrated or to become more cynical and not participate. So sometimes a way to get involved is to give people that hope, to tell them that their voice matters, to send a message on WhatsApp to your family or to post on social media and say, you know what, today I'm helping with our local voter registration drive at Jamaat Khana, because I believe that our power is going to help us unlock a reality that we haven't seen yet. Or it might be going on a radio show and talking about an issue that matters to you, whether it be about refugees or about education or about climate change, doing whatever you can in your own capacity to make sure that you continue to stay engaged and involved. Because at times when you think politics doesn't matter, politics is very interested in us. There's a reason why there are so many efforts to suppress our votes, because our votes matter. Our votes are our voice, and our voice is going to help give direction to this country. So every single time someone says, you know, I'd rather stay at home, someone else can be sitting in that chair making a decision that doesn't represent us. And it's absolutely critical for us to stand up and rise together and say, I will take the opportunity today to inspire someone and make them realize that they possess the power to change our country.
Thank you so much. Those are all great ideas. Samir, I'd love to hear from you on this as well.
Yeah, I think, again, I agree with everything Kareem has said. And for me, I have never been more proud to be part of our American Ismaili identity than I am right now. And a big part of that is this effort that we're taking all around the country to be more active and more involved, right? For example, just as Kareem mentioned, in Texas this weekend, we had drive-through voter registration drives at our Jamaat Khanas. We had 2 in Dallas. We had them in Houston, San Antonio, Austin. And this makes me so proud. And I also think back to my childhood. One of the most formative memories I have, and one of the biggest reasons why I got involved, was during the 2004 election. My dad was an election judge. And so I remember going to the middle school after I was in elementary school at the time. And I remember going to the middle school after class ended for the day and seeing my dad helping people with their right to vote, exercising their right to vote. And his signature went on every ballot there. So seeing that is one way that I realized that it's not just about voting, but it's about being involved. For example, like being a poll worker or being an election judge. I have a friend of mine who she's not like Arisa and Kareem and I, where she considers politics as part of her day-to-day profession, but instead she views it as a civic obligation and a responsibility. And so she is going to be a poll worker on November 3rd. And I am so proud of her and all the other folks across the country, both in our community and beyond it, that are taking the time to put their time and energy towards making sure that other people have the right to vote and exercise that. And on top of that, you know, when it comes to being involved in campaigns, we can be a part of people that canvass or go door to door when, you know, we're not in a pandemic, but there's other opportunities when we are in the state that we're in right now to still be able to convince folks to go out and vote. And oftentimes it starts with our own family and talking to them about the issues that they may care about and how the candidates that are on their ballot can determine which way and how those issues are resolved.
Absolutely. I love that mentality your friend has, that it's not a profession, it's a civic obligation. That's absolutely wonderful. Arisa, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I do, Natasha. There are 3 things that all of us can do this election season to make sure that everyone we know is registered to vote, ready to vote, and turns out to vote. And the first thing that I want to mention is piggybacking off of what Samir said, and that is volunteering. Volunteering with a local voter registration drive, volunteering with at When We All Vote. We are doing text banking. I know that a lot of organizations this election season are doing phone banking. So that is one thing that we can all do. We can all get involved with what's going on in our local communities. The second thing that we can all do is check our voter registration and make sure that it's up to date. There are a lot of forces at work out there trying to make sure that people are not able to vote. In Georgia in 2018, 300,000 people were purged from the voter rolls. They showed up to vote and they were not able to. So one thing that we can all do to fight voter suppression is to check our voter registration and make sure that everyone we know does the same. And the last thing that we can all do is to make a voting plan. There, again, a lot of forces at work trying to make sure that people do not exercise their right to the ballot box. And it's so important for those of us who are able to vote early to vote early. For those of us who know we are voting by mail, to request our ballots. For those of us who know that we are voting in person, to look up our polling place. So we can all make a plan to vote. We can all check and make sure that our voter registration is up to date. We can all volunteer and get involved to make sure that we are getting in touch with Americans across the country and our friends and our family in our own communities to make sure that they are checking their voter registration, to make sure that they have a plan to vote, and to see maybe you want to volunteer together. Maybe you can bring other people into this important work. There are so many ways to get involved this election season, and it's something that all of us can do.
Yeah, there are definitely a lot of great ideas that have been thrown around just now. So I'd love to open it up again if there are any more that came to mind.
Yeah, just building right off of what Arisa said. I think the other thing that makes me really excited about this moment in time is that our effort within the Jamaat is multi-generational, right? So for example, my grandfather, my dada, who's in his 80s, just filled out his mail-in ballot a couple days ago and sent it in. So he's the first one in our family to vote this cycle, and that just makes me so happy. And like I mentioned about some of the younger folks that I know in our Jamaat who are incredibly passionate, who are motivated and have so much energy that they want to devote to this, for you guys, make sure that you and your friends, especially if you've gone off to college, are registered to vote, and make sure that you're registered in your right locations. A cousin of mine just moved from Dallas, where we are, out to College Station, and he's registered to vote there. So making sure that you're registered is the first step that we all have to do. And by helping out our family and checking in on them for them, that's a long way that we can go to making sure that everyone in our circle is making sure that they exercise their right to vote.
Yes, absolutely. And that is actually a perfect segue into my next question. So you all mentioned talking to friends and family about the selection cycle and how they can get involved. But how do you talk to friends or family about the importance of voting if they are apathetic about voting? And I'd love to go to Kareem first, because the story about your 17-year-old cousin really, I think, highlighted the frustration and that can lead to apathy. So I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Sure. There are folks who think that their vote doesn't matter. And let me be as clear as I can that every single vote matters. If you are unhappy by the choices at the top of your ticket, think about what is truly at stake in this election. Aside from a presidential election, the Supreme Court is on the ballot. Governorships are on the ballot. Redistricting after the 2020 census is on the ballot. Climate change and a more secure and safe and healthy air quality is on the ballot. Education, safe schools are on the ballot. And a sense of stability and steadiness and decency and respect and kindness and compassion are on the ballot. And for those of us who have the right to vote, we should feel so incredibly proud of what privilege we hold, because we have family members who might not be able to vote this election. So if you feel apathetic, think about those who want to vote and are unable to vote. Think about those who are too young to vote and are really counting on you to cast your vote to be their voice. Or think about our family members. I have lost 3 family members to the COVID-19 crisis. and a countless amount of friends who have lost their family members and their friends and their neighbors. Think about those who are no longer with us, those 200,000 Americans who have perished in this pandemic, who are unable to vote because of decisions that were made against their will. Think about those who will come into a country that they haven't seen yet, our children and our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren. I hope you see this election in November not as what's going to happen in less than 30 days, but something that is quite literally going to shape our generation for years, decades, and centuries to come. What you do during early vote and what you do on election day on November 3rd is going to be written in the history books to say, we did everything we could to make our country a more safe, prosperous, and peaceful place, that we changed the tides of our country. So if you are apathetic, think about all those issues that are at stake, all the values that you have grown up with, all the family members that you have who could be a part of this election. And when you go cast your vote, cast it with pride, cast it with dignity, and cast it with a sense of responsibility that a country that awaits us awaits your participation in this election.
Thank you so much, Kareem. You definitely gave a lot for us to think about, a lot of very important things for us to think about. Samir or Arisa, anything else?
Yes, absolutely. I think there are two parts of this. The first one is exactly what Kareem just said, that this election is going to shape everything for years to come. Public health is on the ballot, climate change is on the ballot, education is on the ballot. And so I think that one thing that I have noticed is that a lot of what we think of as apathy actually stems from cynicism. I've heard from a lot of friends back home who say things like, you know what, the game is rigged, or my vote doesn't really matter because the Electoral College decides who the president is. And I think that there's a couple things that we need to do when we encounter these kinds of responses. One is to ask questions and get to the root of what is going on. Specifically, ask them about what issue they care about. If they have lost family members to COVID-19, again, that is on the ballot. If they really care about the future of education and education reform in this country, that is something that is on the ballot as well. So I find that in my conversations with friends and family, it's very helpful to try and talk to the other person and figure out what is going on and the root of what it is that they care about and how that relates to this current election. And then I think another piece is to realize that everything that is on the ballot, it's not just on the national end, but there's so much on this community and local end that affects all of us. I have some friends who weren't necessarily planning to vote on November 3rd, but there are also folks who are really passionate about criminal justice and reforming the systemic racism that exists in our country. And we had a conversation and I talked to them about how attorney generals are on the ballot, sheriffs are on the ballot, governors, chiefs of police are on the ballot. And so everything from the senators that we are electing to the president that we are electing to the representatives we are electing to the mayors, all of it matters. All of it affects issues that we touch and that we care about. And so everything is at play. And it is important to fight apathy with actually figuring out the root of why this person is feeling apathetic. Again, often it's cynicism, and making sure that we're bringing that to that local level and really acknowledging how a lot of what we are working towards this election season affects us very directly.
Yeah, absolutely. I love how you brought in the personal, like interpersonal relationships and how that conversation can happen, and absolutely how local these elections really are. Samir, anything else to add on this?
To me, just as Arisa said, the most important thing is finding common ground with people who don't necessarily see every issue the same way that you do. And I think that's where all of this starts. I think the ability to empathize with a different, someone else's point of view is really crucial to being able to have a constructive discussion on how we can convince other folks who may not be as engaged as we are to go ahead and reach for the ballot themselves. And so a couple of things that I think are really good to focus on are also just recognizing that even within our Jamaat, there are a plethora of different views on so many different issues, from the economy to the way that immigration reform should work in this country, to criminal justice, to healthcare. And these are all issues that affect us, right? So just as Kareem and Arisa touched on, is reminding our friends and family who may not be as committed as we are that yes, these issues matter and that the power to change them is within their hands. But I think the other thing to do is to also appeal to the common hopes and dreams that we all have. You know, regardless of what our political affiliations are, I think we all want to see a country that is more prosperous. We all want to see a country that's better for our children than the one that we ourselves inherited. And what's true about this moment is that that's never guaranteed. It's within our power to be able to shape the future so that it is better than the one that we received ourselves. So for me, the most important thing to do whenever I'm talking to folks who may be less inclined to vote than I am is to try and relate to them and empathize with why they feel like it's not as important for them to vote, but to try and meet them on their level, and then to show them the kinds of issues that they care about that are at stake. And just as Arisa said, policy is not just made at the top of the ticket. It's not just emanating from the White House and the halls of Congress. You know, important laws are made not just in our state capitals, but also in our city halls. And oftentimes the issues that affect us most directly and in the most closeness in terms of time happen at the local levels. And so it's important to show, our friends and family that are a little bit hesitant that the issues that they care about, not just the ones that we care about, but the issues that they care about are very much on the line as well, that they are indeed on the ballot, and that it's our job to be able to vote for the candidates who we think best represent the way that we feel.
Thank you so much. Our last question for tonight is kind of looping it back to something we talked about a lot. We mentioned the word civic engagement a lot in the questions and a lot in our answers, but I'd love to ask each one of you, what does civic engagement mean to you?
For me, civic engagement means taking our power back and realizing our power. Again, there are a lot of people in this country and in this world who have a lot of power, who have a lot of influence, and who have a vested interest in you not voting and you not being civically engaged. So they are counting on you to feel cynical, to feel apathetic, to feel hopeless. Don't let them do that. If you don't like someone's policies and you don't think they're making your community a better place, vote them out. If you are feeling lost and trying to figure out where to start, approach anyone on this panel, or head to whenweallvote.org to volunteer, or contact your county board of elections and sign up to be a poll worker. And if you don't see candidates who represent you, grab a clipboard and run for office yourself. Because ultimately, this democracy works for all of us when all of us show up. And we need to do that.
100% agree. Thank you so much. Samir or Kareem?
That's a tough act to follow. Arisa, I 100% agree with you. When you said that last line, it reminded me of President Obama's farewell address. I was grateful enough to work at the White House right when President Obama was wrapping up his presidency. And he said that the most important office that any of us can hold is the office of the citizen. Civic engagement at its core is about realizing that citizens have power and realizing that the power we possess is in the ideas that we have, in the hopes that we share, and in the country that we aim to build together. So civic engagement in voting is one part of the story of what it means to be an active citizen. Because when we decided to take the oath of citizenship, for those of us who are naturalized and for those of us who are American by birth, we tried to say that we believe in equality and justice for all. Civic engagement and the incredible work that the institutions are doing right now are to show us that equality and justice matter. That when we vote in November, and for those of us who are voting early, realize that voting is our civic responsibility and our responsibilities as citizens. As I think about everything that can happen in the next 30 days or less, I have so much optimism. I have so much hope. And I don't have that cynicism because I know we have collective power. I know that we have a way to see this country through and to see a way to build back better, to restore the soul of our nation, and to bring unity over division, to have love conquer hate, and to make sure that every single day we are working to lift up the voices of hardworking Americans and hardworking Ismailis who are doing everything in their power to make our country just a little bit better every single day. So civic engagement is about restoring that soul of our nation, restoring at our core what we believe America can and should be, because that aspirational America that we think about every day is the actionable America that we can build with this election.
Thank you so much, Kareem, for sharing all of those wonderful words of wisdom. Samir, civic engagement.
Yeah, it's so important, right? That's the entire reason that we're here. And I agree with everything, absolutely, that Kareem has said, and Arisa as well. And so for me, I also think of a quote by President Obama, and that was, it's not, he asked the country not to believe in the ability of any one person in political office to bring change, but to believe in our own ability to bring change. And so that is so, I think that's incredibly prescient, right? Because the idea of being a responsible and active and engaged citizen falls to us. It's a responsibility that too often not all of us avail ourselves of, that we don't actually fulfill that responsibility, that duty that we have. So for me, civic engagement, it starts with voting. Voting is the bare minimum. Voting in every election, whether it's a presidential election or if it's a local election for city council, voting in every election is the bare minimum. And so what engagement means beyond that is being a volunteer on campaigns that you care about, on helping register other people in the community to vote, on helping them find their polling places, on being poll workers, on helping with the census, on making sure that everybody filled out their census. It's so, so crucial. And so for me, civic engagement really means so much more than voting. It's about empowering ourselves to view this world as one that we can change if we all act together. If we do it together, there's really nothing that's beyond our power. And so for me, civic engagement is all about that idea that together we can accomplish anything, but we have to do something about it. And that starts and certainly doesn't end, but it starts with voting.
Thank you so much, Samir. I love the idea of building collective power, and I think that's a great place to end our panel tonight. So thank you to all of our panelists and to the Ismaili Student Network and the Ismaili Professionals Network for hosting us on the Ismaili USA's platform tonight. As our panelists and others mentioned, please register to vote, and you can do that at the.ismaili/USA/vote. If you need assistance, please call or text 202-854-VOTE. Remember, the election ends in less than 30 days. November 3rd is not the only day to vote, but the last day to vote. Make a vote plan today and make sure your friends and family vote too. Thank you all for joining us tonight.